So for those who don't know me, Brian Feldman, I am just hit 22 years in the Navy. Extremely privileged to be the CEO at Portsmouth, which is I'm still kind of hasn't hit me yet. But I'm a pediatrician. I'm a pediatric oncologist, and the framework for this is, I think one of the most important things I've learned through my career as an oncologist, where I'm having difficult conversations with patients and just trying to maximize those skills. Conflict always comes up, and I think and Jen can probably tell you this. One of the biggest challenges with pediatrics is actually the parents, and unfortunately, children with complicated diseases, a lot of that side drama and conflict comes out. So some of this I actually started to try to be a better doctor in communicating difficult things and difficult diagnoses. And then what I kind of learned as we all get leadership roles is conflict management and having challenging communication or challenging conversations, and then really understanding how I'm personally jumping to conclusions or what my personal biases are that may interact with that, or something I've just kind of done a lot of reading on. So I picked a couple of I don't know if the primer came out, and if not, I can make sure that goes out. But couple of different books that I thought are really good if you like to read. But one's The Fifth Discipline. Another is something called The Ladder of Inference by Argyll, which Chris Argyris, which just kind of organizes the mental processes. And then there's another great book called Thanks for Your Feedback. And so that's kind of been our CAPT University, our journal clubs that we've been doing with our board of directors. So I'm just going to walk through some examples of that, and if this is useful, you are welcome to take these slides and cannibalize them. But I hopefully it went out. It's about a 4-page summary. It's like a book summary that really has some great examples. So and please interrupt me at any time. So starting off, I love using this example. What I do with the team as an icebreaker is everybody gets a shape, and the bottom line up front is, what we show them is that there's a 3-dimensional object, and depending on your perspective, everybody is seeing the truth. And so, ironically, I'm here with the DHA leadership on making some draconian cuts and balancing our missions, and I use this actually with the DHA leadership of, hey, this is what my staff see that you think we're underproductive, and also understanding what they're seeing so we can kind of come to what reality is. So really simplistic example: George, Judy, and Bill. Judy presents an idea to a small group, and there's a little storyboard that goes with this. So she's given a presentation, and she's looking at the audience, and so what she's identifying are facts, data, and observable events, and she's going to select out facts and potentially jump to some conclusions. And so just for what kind of stands out with the audience that you guys are seeing, and you can read it. So I'll give you a hint. George is looking at his phone. So how might that be interpreted to the presenter?
Like he's distracted and not.
Yeah. So that's perfect. So that's one interpretation. All right. Bill Scouten has his arms crossed and his eyes closed. What's one potential interpretation of that?
He's disinterested and doesn't really care to be there.
Yep. And then Lisa's scratching her head.
He doesn't understand.
Yeah. So maybe so if I were Judy, I am this is me to a T. When I'm presenting to an audience who I'm looking at the body language, I totally go right down those paths in my mind. So so she's selecting data and she's making assumptions, and applying meaning to that. But maybe there's an alternative. Maybe something else is going on. So what are some So some alternative things that are going on. So what's an alternative reason that George could be looking at his phone?
He's taking notes.
Yeah, maybe he's actually more interested in what she's saying. Maybe he's looking up stuff because she's generating some good ideas. So great. What about arms? Bill Scouton, arms crossed, legs crossed.
This happens to me a lot. It can be really cold in the room and you just cross your arms because you're freezing.
Perfect. Yeah.
Or he has a newborn
Exactly.
and he never gets any sleep. He's trying.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So maybe there's something else going on in his life. This is probably the most common thing when somebody's, distracted or not engaged or not performing well, is they probably have something going on with life that's really stressful and that's distracting them. So excellent. And Lisa, scratching your head.
So some people, when they like study or are paying close attention, like I know my daughter does this with her hair, like it's actually, I don't know, soothing while you're engaged on something. So she may be like very engaged actually.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Or her
Maybe
kids
she's
gave
got
her lice.
a medical condition or lice. Yeah. All right, great. So the key thing I always ask is and strive toward is the why. Like I think change. We are in the amidst continuous change, and kind of understanding how to really lead change versus just management is something that we all have to do with what we're encountering as leaders in the organization. So this is a quick summary of the ladder of inference. And so, it's so easy to jump to conclusions. So I really like Chris Argris's mapping of this. It's called the ladder. In fact, Matt McLean and I at our last command, we would literally have this in our lexicon. We had little ladders throughout the command, little magnetic ladders. So anytime we had quite a bit of conflict management there. And I can't tell you every week, like, we're like, hey, I'm up on my ladder with this person. What's going on? But there's 7 steps that he describes, and it's a cycle. And often you can jump up the rings of that ladder to conclusions, assumptions, and actions very quickly. But at the base is all your observable data. Then you select that data. And then you pass it through your own internal filters. You add meaning to it based on your personal, professional, cultural experiences, and so that can make it subjective. You jump right to making assumptions about the meanings that you add to those observations. That leads to drawing conclusions. Things like trust, your perceptions of competence of what you're observing, all factor in that. And then you apply beliefs to that. And then based on those beliefs, you take an action. So just having that mental mindset to think through, if you're doing that subconsciously, is kind of the point of his ladder. And so if you can actively step back and say, and try to think of one other perspective of what you're observing in a situation, can really help you understand what your biases are and how to better communicate. And the little example on the bottom, 2 guys painting a picture. One sees bars and one sees a beautiful outdoor view. So again, thanks for your feedback. This is the book that I drew a lot of this out of. And so this one I like because it's really about receiving feedback, and a lot of times I've spent more time on how to give feedback, and I think as you guys communicating as GME leaders and teaching residents, we're always giving feedback, but I think we in my experience we don't spend as much time on how to receive feedback. So that's kind of what I've been working with our staff on. So making sure that it's heard, understood, digested, and acted upon. And then really thinking through where does it go wrong? How can this fail? So, and those concepts are called truth triggers, relationship triggers, and identity triggers. it is really easy for two people to see the same communication differently. That's called the gap map. So I pulled this out of the book, and it's analogous to the latter. You've got your thoughts and feelings. You've got you know what your intentions are. That leads to your behaviors. You have an impact on others, and others may not understand that and see you differently. So that's why I joke. There's three sides to every story, and it really is true. And this is how it happens. So the things you're aware of, and then your impact of others, you may not be aware of that. So a story is always a combination of both thoughts and feelings, and maybe some distractors that either party are not aware of. So what are some common behavioral blind spots? Our face. So this is something I'm very sensitive to. The subtle nuances of eyes and facial expressions convey a mood, and I'll tell you, it's been even more challenging, and I have to really actively watch myself as a CO, because I think I'm a regular guy. I'm just like you all, but that positional authority conveys extra layers, and that can happen as you become more senior, as you're interacting with corpsmen or students. So just being mindful about our facial expressions, and even just asking the question like, hey, what are you guys seeing when I say this? Tone. So I'm a soft-spoken guy. So sometimes I need to actively make sure that I'm projecting, and sometimes that can come off as, hey, the CO's yelling at me. But pitch, cadence definitely convey your emotional state. So just being mindful of our tone can be a behavioral blind spot. In my case, patterns. So great example is sometimes I've had to actively pull back my ideas, because sometimes that inhibits what I really want to get to, which is to get everybody's ideas on the table on how to attack a problem. And patterns come out very quickly. So just if you have a conversation with somebody and you take something for action and you don't deliver, that can be devastating on the trust and how people hear you and believe what you're saying. So blind spot amplifiers, emotions, and that can be variable based on what's going on in your life and what kind of day you're having. The situation versus character. So when something goes awry, we tend to attribute our own actions to the situations, while others can often attribute it to our character. Can anybody think of an example of that?
When you have somebody coming in late to a shift or clinic, and everybody assumes that person's just a dirtbag, they're always late, but traffic, kids, everything else.
Yep, great. I'm kind of navigating that with the DHA, right? So at least at Portsmouth, everybody's like, oh, we can't do things, or things are bad because of the DHA. So, but we are the DHA, and I've got lots of friends in the DHA, and I'm a DHA director, and they're just like us. So just trying to overcome that cultural difference. So great. Impact versus intent. So we tend to judge ourselves by our intent, while others judge us on our impact. Anybody think of a good example of that?
You have one? Oh, sorry. I thought Jen had one, but she didn't.
No, I'm sorry. I was chewing. Sorry, I'm eating my lunch now because I have another meeting at 12. But where sometimes when you're trying to help someone, right, and they feel that you're just intrusive to them, and that you're trying to take over. Like, for example, I always like to use like PI projects because I love doing PI projects. When you're on it and you're trying to help. I'm sorry, but they see it as you're taking over and moving it where you want it to go instead of where the team wants it to go. Is that what you mean, sir?
Yeah. well-meaning or just depending on what your personality is. You're you know, and this really comes down to management versus leadership. But gosh, I'm trying to think of a good example. So I trying to think. So when we do our board of directors meetings, we always have a round table, and one of the biggest challenges we're having is realistic and reasonable strategic planning, like strategic goals. And so I put together a half-day retreat, and we had somebody come down, and we did the whiteboards, and we came up with lines of effort. And I thought I was helping set a framework, an organizational framework, with real clear guidance on what we were going to do and how we were going to manage resources. And I set a deadline, a monthly battle rhythm of, hey, we're gonna follow up on these things. So so a month goes by and nobody had touched anything. And so from my perspective, I thought, hey, I spent all this time to get a really organized framework and to listen and write down what your ideas were. But what we determined, and folks were just too shy to speak up, is they really didn't understand. And so I literally scrapped it. I said, okay, that's what I need to know. So I had all this great intent, and I took a bunch of their time. But what happened is they were deferential to me, and all I did was create a negative impact on adding workflow to their day that they didn't understand, and we failed at setting conditions to really generate understanding. So we scrapped it, and we're starting over, and we had to do that anyway because, as you may have heard, we are one of the 5 venture sites for a digital health initiative that's going to be really interesting. So so anyway, good. I think a lot of people have good intentions, but it's just the point. The point of the story is to be mindful on the negative impacts and really set conditions so people feel comfortable to speak up. So here's what happens when you combine blind spots and amplifiers, and this is what I see navigating the Navy versus the DHA on a daily basis. And the biggest currency in avoiding this is trust. And so we talk a lot about trust and developing trust and feeling safe in speaking up and in a productive and respectful way. So, but it's so easy to just make assumptions. It's so easy to say, gosh, the DHA is just ridiculous, and the DHA, they just don't get it, what it's like being in the Navy because they're Army. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. So stepping back to see the relationship is probably a good foundational thing, and I think we jump right into business a lot. What I've tried to do is just take that strategic pause, take the time to build a relationship, to get a baseline understanding of those that we're working with, and communicate, really just very practically communicate. Hey, here's what I'm seeing. Here's how I'm perceiving this. What are you seeing? What are your frustrations? So that we're really mindful of our contribution to the half of the relationship. So again, if you can think through that ladder and step back and say, hey, you know what? I'm making an assumption about this person who's not performing, and stepping back down that ladder, coming up with at least one other explanation as to why something's not going well, then you can understand how somebody's seeing their life through your lens and vice versa. So feedback labels. So our biases polarize the lens. There's a ton of good content on that. And it talks about human nature, which is you're going to select that data that confirms your pre-existing view of someone, whether it's good or bad. I've seen that on the flip side with people that I really admire and like, where, hey, they made a mistake and they're not doing well, and it's so easy to just sweep that under the rug and not hold them accountable, or do that for yourself. So so being mindful of that, and probably the biggest time I see that is with managing GS civilians. When you've got those relationships, and I think it's very easy. You know who your good performers are. You know who your subpar performers are. But the challenge is treating everybody truly the same, and equal, and having that equality of accountability, because it's so easy to just, we all avoid conflict, and it's so easy to sweep that under the rug. Another point that he makes in the book is that what you do and don't notice is not as random as you might think. So again, if you like somebody, they're likable, they're generally incredibly competent. You may have some blind spots on what are some negative things that are impacting how they are performing or getting their job done, or leading or managing their teams. So it's always good to have those conversations, and I always start them with, "Hey, let me tell you about my biases. Let me tell you about the things that I think I can do better." So labels. So I'm an introvert. I'm pretty shy, and so what I've learned is sometimes I come off as aloof, or because I actively, as the CO, keep quiet because I want to hear the discussion. I want to get the ideas out there. People think I'm disengaged. I think I'm pretty upbeat, but that can come off as phony. If you're a really direct, blunt person, you're a truth teller from your perspective, you come off as blunt and abrasive to someone else. Being passionate can come off as kind of a overly aggressive, strong personality. Really smart people are sometimes coming off as arrogant. If you have high standards and you demand the best, you can be perceived by those you're working with as being hypercritical. Outgoing people can come off as overbearing. Efficient people can look like they're abrupt or even lazy sometimes, because they just want to get it done and move on. So the key thing is not confusing data with interpretation. So and when you're communicating with somebody, and you're giving feedback, say, "Hey, I noticed when we're discussing a topic, you seem frustrated. You cut me off mid-sentence and came to a conclusion. So that's how I perceived it. But what's your side of the story?" So that can be a really powerful way to open communication. So implicit biases, implicit rules. So each of us have different constructs in our head on how we think things should be based in our organization, both professionally, our families, our experiences, the diversity of all aspects of our life. So you have to be mindful to not think of our rules as the rules, and that can be challenging. So example is everyone at your old job loved you, and then you PCS, and that's not the case at your new job. So now you say, "Hey, you're difficult, but you haven't changed. So what's different?" The rules have changed. Your old job, you may have had a different leadership role. You may not have been in a leadership role. You may have had that time to build relationships. The new job, you may be coming into a critical situation where you really have to take a different approach. So stepping back and not bringing those biases from a prior environment as you get a reset. So navigating feedback conversation. So this is I'm going to make fun of some of my DHA colleagues, but that meme from the office. I appreciate your feedback. Let me explain why you're wrong. I get that a lot from senior leaders. So it's really easy for me to go into the pitfall of, well, that advice is wrong. A better way to think about it is, well, I disagree, and here's why, and let me communicate that. So that's that's kind of how we've been trying to attack things with all of the demand signals from our bosses. So relationship mistakes. So it's something called switch tracking. So boy, you're a self-centered jerk. A better way to think through it is, all right, I'm feeling underappreciated, so it's hard for me to focus on your feedback. So let's discuss how I'm feeling so that I can better understand your feedback. Systems, blame, and contribution. So, well, this isn't my problem. It's not my fault. I'm not the problem. The better is okay, stepping back and thinking through, okay, what's my contribution to this conflict? Let's step back and look at the big picture together. Let's get all the inputs and let's come together on how we're going to change things. And then identity, we are really tied to our identities. So you might get some feedback that makes you think, boy, that's just not me. I know that in my heart. But if you can step back and say, and realize, okay, I'm reacting by being upset from what I'm hearing because that's not how I see myself or who I want to be, and actually putting that out there with the person giving you feedback can be very effective. So focusing on change. So how do you work for feedback for change? Keeping it really simple. So what is one thing I could change that would make a difference for you? So using that I, making it about yourself, and then offering up to the person that you're interacting with on what they need. What is something, and then get to actions. What's something that I'm doing that gets you engaged on my own effectiveness, or that's a barrier to my own effectiveness. And then really trying to step back from labels and the interpretation of behavior, and then focus on the actual behavior. Say, when this happened, like hey, you're doing this, and kind of putting somebody on the defensive, say, this, I'm seeing you do this, and this behavior is, and this is how I'm interpreting this behavior. So what you say and do as a supervisor and a leader, that say-do gap can be very powerful. And so, and it's very easy to fail at following through, to fail to get organized and following through. And it can really polarize the people that you're working with. So the key thing is also to make sure that you're pulling in peripheral members, because often that's where you're going to get some of the best ideas, and really proactively go after the people who you think have the most intense or biased views and challenge them on why. And you can turn some of your worst opponents for change management into your greatest allies. So anyway, great TED Talk that probably does a way better job of walking through these couple of books than I did, but I think that's the slide deck. But I just wanted to pause for questions, comments, and feedback.
Wow, thank you so much. That was a lovely talk. Do we have any questions from our specialty leaders? We're all specialty leaders on the call today.
Sir,
If not, I'll answer questions about absolutely anything you guys are curious about.
Well, I have a question, sir. Sorry, let me move close to the microphone. I found that especially during, with the shift to a lot more virtual meetings, that there's a lot more miscommunication, or not, I guess my intent in how things are communicated is not necessarily how it's perceived. Do you have any feedback or tricks when doing these kinds of virtual sessions, or where they can't necessarily see your face, or to pick up on the small cues that I'm trying to give to them?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Luckily, a lot of times you can have cameras on, so I always forced everybody to have cameras on. And we kind of made it a contest and a game, because you probably know there's some pretty entertaining filters just to get people engaged. think the first thing is I just get the address the elephant in the room. And so anytime I'm doing a virtual meeting, I say, hey, I just explained, I really value face-to-face communication. So this is challenging for me. And I just get it out there that, hey, if you're typing in the chat, texting, emailing, a lot of context can be lost. So just over communicating and, or if something's said, just taking the extra time and effort to explore it and say, hey, this is, I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying, repeating the question back. So just sounds basic, but just taking, it's so easy for us to be rushed and not take the time to make sure we're listening for understanding. And then just like basic ground rules, for those conversations. And I definitely could do this better because I think we're just all so used to it. But those are just some of the thoughts. One thing I learned from just some of the generational differences. I really enjoy verbal conversation and face-to-face conversation and seeing that body language. And I had a really junior fleet surgical team of 18, 19-year-olds, and they just wanted to text. So what I had to adapt to is, so we would have a meeting and they would not write things down. They wouldn't process things. So what we learned is that we had to set a rotational secretary, and we would send out a text message string of what we talked about and what our tasks were, to stay organized. So I think just taking the time to have that conversation with the audience if you're leading the meeting, and then also if you're participating, and on the flip side and you see something that just feeling comfortable to step and say, hey, I just want to make sure I understood what you said. So it all comes down to closed loop communication, but really great point. And same thing with patients too, as we're driving toward virtual care, for many of us who haven't grown up in that environment, and it is being mandated. So we've got to adapt to that, and our patients have to adapt to that. So getting the comfort level of how I practice medicine, and those, the whole complete picture of how patients listening to what I'm saying and hearing it and understanding, I've got to figure out how to adapt that to the virtual environment. Anybody else have any advice or experience with that? I'm sure you guys have all had great experiences.
So I think I've had some great opportunities because Monica and I are both child psychiatrists, so we see a lot of young people, and I think some of the interesting things that I found with the few adolescents that I see these days is, like for secure messaging, they'll like sign on to secure messaging while we're talking in the session, and then I'll send them all of their documents in real time, right? And it's been a little while since we had secure messaging, but that type of thing where before they leave, they've already searched it, found it, I've verified what they, paperwork they have, and we've figured out a way to communicate that works for them. So I think that's been really useful.
Yeah. I'll tell you another thing. I don't know if you guys noticed as I was putting the thing up, don't multitask. That is a huge danger of these online meetings. So I will intentionally close out my Outlook so that I'm not distracted and I'm paying attention. And I think we catch that all the time where somebody's got their text messaging going, they've got their Outlook up, their emails, we get distracted. So just the power of focus too, in not multitasking is another, I think, important thing. I'm actually going to pick. I'm going to ask Adam Jakubec if he remembers what something I learned from every experience, but had a really interesting experience with. I won't use names, but Adam was what was it? I forget which admiral it was, but I was at the submarine research lab, and I went down to Kings Bay to we were asked to do a brief on a microbiome study on submarines. And so I went down with our team, and I had a very junior research psychologist who was not very polished in presenting. So the CO said, "Hey, you better go because this is a pretty intense admiral." So we had a really direct, interesting admiral, and we get in there, and I think Adam, you were there, and we do introductions, and I start the brief, and he just throws it down, and says, "I don't want to hear your brief. I don't want to hear what you're selling. I don't know why you're here." So that was a really interesting experience to step back. Not hopefully, and I want to see what Adam's how it came from an external advisor, but my whole team was kind of in shell shock, and so we just redirected, and I think I'd said something to the effect of, "Okay, sir, got it. I'm here to listen and see what you need." And he did most of the talking because he wanted to talk about himself, but it was a really fascinating experience with a senior, really talented, really direct nuclear submarine flag officer. But Adam, do you remember that? Were you there, or you may not have been in the?
I remember that. I think I was actually TAD for that meeting, but I heard all about it, and he was very much you're. I mean, he literally would tell you, "You're either with me or you're against me, or you're." What was he say? He would say, "You're either a zealot or a martyr." So it was an intense command climate to say the least. But yeah, I remember that, and I mean, from day one, he had like his idea of what he wanted to implement, and it was up to us to figure out how to make it work. And so it's, in some ways, it's kind of inspiring to work for people that are so passionate, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, maybe we need to kind of figure out, but what worked at your last command? Because he came from recruit training command, so like he came from a very different place, from training recruits in boot camp to, leading, ballistic missile submarines, and different age group, different demographics. So like what works for like brand new recruits maybe isn't going to work for a crew 150 seasoned submariners. So but yeah, definitely one of the more intense personalities I've ever had to work with in my career so far.
So the cool thing about that story is so we actually had some follow-on. So just by stepping back, letting him talk, listening, he and I had two other opportunities to brief him, and by the third, he's calling me Brian, like we're old friends. But I actually I got the gumption up and said, "Hey, sir, this is how we were invited down here. I want to give you some feedback." And I think people were afraid because of his position to give him feedback, but we ended up getting pretty aligned, and I certainly learned a lot on how I needed to communicate to the submarine community, which is a very unique breed. So a little example of just being able to step back and not get defensive, which definitely takes you some time as you develop, but and just kind of adapt to the situation you're in. So. Well, let's see. I think we're I was not intended to go this long. So I know you guys have a lot of important things to do, but I got 5 more minutes for absolutely anything that's on your mind. And I'm also, either publicly or privately, I'd love feedback on this, how to make it more effective. In hindsight, I think I usually am a little bit more interactive than I was, which again, doing this remotely is harder than doing it with a live audience. So.
Any last minute questions for Captain Feldman?
Thank you so much, sir. This was a really great talk. Really appreciate it. I think that a lot of the topics that you touched on are things that are not taught and just assumed that as leaders we need to know and teach ourselves. And so I think it's really nice to have these kinds of talks with these skills that are necessary in these positions, but that are not innate to all of us.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I think we as a medical corps need to do, that's one of the things I think we can all do better is take the time and get the resources to to get to train on these things, because we all train to be specialists and clinicians, and the rest of this kind of comes as OJT. So but I know you got a really talented team up there at UMed who are doing just that, so we just have to take advantage of those opportunities.
All right, well, thank you again, sir. We really appreciated your talk. I'm going to go ahead and take the recording and stop it.